Happy Halloween and welcome to the Gaming Lounge Podcast, episode 29. Once again, I'm your host, Sebastian, and I'm joined by Dory. How's everything going, Dory?
If I could just shake being cold for like a single day, I think I'd really appreciate that day a lot. But other than that, really good. I can play Metaphor, so we'll talk about that. And we'll talk about what makes the game scary. We're keeping this episode spooky and short.
A good combination. So, it's October, so I hope everybody has been playing horror games and Halloween games. October is nearing its end now. Halloween's only 5 days from now, in the time of this recording. And so I hope have you played any of the horror games you wanted to play. There's also a lot of good fall games that I was recommending. Blue Sky is kicking off, so like everybody's done with Twitter. We're done with the Elon. So I'm happy that everybody's enjoying their time over there, and there's a lot of people are talking about Silent Hill 2 remake and all those Halloween games, like a lot of Resident Evil talk. So I wanted to talk about what makes a game scary. What are the aspects that make a game scary? We did talk about this on another podcast a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, and it's been like 4 years through this discussion. So I was curious if anything has changed or how you feel about it. So the first thing I want to talk about is what makes a game scary is the atmosphere, right? The first thing you think of when you think of a horror game is atmosphere. The atmosphere is everything. Dory, you just recently beat Silent Hill 2 Remake, and that game is just atmospheric as hell. So
yeah, that's like atmosphere of the game. Like if there wasn't already a rapper named Atmosphere, like you could rename Silent Hill 2 to just atmosphere of the game, because a lot of that game does. I mean, for the first hour or so I played it, and I felt the same way about PT as well.
Yeah,
is one of the most, and that's just a single fucking hallway, right?
Yeah.
Mostly. I felt like they were the most atmospheric games I've ever played. I mean, it's oppressive. I mean, just the fog coming on you, the monsters everywhere you look. Most of the buildings not being able to be entered. You're by yourself for a majority of the game. The music, of course, the ambiance, the vibe, as the kids would say. Yeah, it's all there. It's a huge part of what makes a game scary and what's made any game scary for me.
Yeah, I think the fog is very effective. It's a very clever tool that they did in the original game. Obviously, it was meant to hide the limitations of the PS1 and the PS2 game, but it was very effective. And I think when they did the mod to get rid of the fog in Silent Hill 2 Remake, it looks like a totally different game. It was very sunny and beautiful looking. So the fog makes everything. But one of the best things about Silent Hill 2 Remake was the lighting as well. Like a lot of the red lighting looked amazing. Lighting is very important as well in horror games. It can make a huge difference, because it can be really creepy. And horror games are obsessed with rain. Have you noticed modern horror games? They love putting things in rain, or it's like they love the ray tracing.
Mm-hmm.
They love showing that off.
Gotta reflect those puddles.
Yes. And another thing is the sound design. That's everything as well.
Yeah.
Now, like Silent Hill is all about psychological horror and sound design, and like the in Silent Hill, jump scares are not like Resident Evil where like something jumps through a window. It's more like a random noise or like someone's in the bathroom stall and you don't know what it is and it's never explained. It just keeps.
There were definitely moments where like I was going through an area and an enemy would just jump up out at me, or I wouldn't necessarily see one of the mannequin enemies because it would blend in.
Yeah.
And I go like, oh shit.
That happened like 25. That happened to me like 25 times in that game. They just every like bathroom they were hiding in. I swear to God.
Yep. Yeah. Those motherfuckers had to go. I'm telling you. Yeah. I feel like if James had just let them go to the bathroom, I feel like they would have been a lot more friendly.
Yeah. So it makes a big difference in sound design. Silent Hill 2 is the thing about Silent Hill 2 is it's so different from the rest of the Silent Hill games. The Silent Hill other games are all about like cults and demons and stuff. Silent Hill 2 is very much like a more contained story. But like Silent Hill 1 has a lot of like unique sound design where like the music is not like it's not a song, it's just like rattling with metal, like banging on metal. Like the whole soundtrack in the one area is just like the composer just banging on metal, and it's really effective. It keeps you on edge. So music makes a huge difference. The music in Resident Evil is very iconic as well.
Yes.
Like everybody knows the save theme and
Yep.
Resident Evil 2 and the police station theme. There's all different types of things. Like when you're in the basement, because I was playing Resident Evil 2 on GOG a little bit, and like I was thinking of like the basement area where there's all the zombie dogs, and like the music in there is so creepy. I mean, I play it so many times now that I'm just speed running it, so it's not really creepy to me.
Right.
But you get what I'm saying. Like if you're playing for the
Yeah.
first time, it keeps you on edge completely.
Just imagine your character going down there like, oh, again, like eye roll.
No, it's more like they're doing this. They're like,
Yeah.
get out of Raccoon
Nobody
City
did
in
that.
1 hour.
Yeah, that's right.
Kill Burke in 1 hour. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, so that makes a big difference as well. And of course, the visuals are really important. I like the creature designs are really important. Like the character designs, that makes a big difference as well. Like Resident Evil has awesome monster designs, and
Yeah, again, I go back to Silent Hill 2. I mean, you look at James, he looks like he's been through the fucking ringer, you know? And obviously the remake really helps with that. I mean, he's I guess in his late 20s, you said, early 30s.
he's
But
like
he looks like
it's like 29, I think.
yeah, but he looks like he's in his 40s, you know? Or maybe late 30s. You know, he looks 10 years older than he actually is, at least. Just because of how haggard he looks.
Right, I could be wrong, but I think they aged him up a little bit. I thought he was. I think he was supposed to be in his early 20s in the original, and he looked older. I guess they figured that he already looked older, so they wanted to age him up a little bit. It's like almost 30.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
But he looks way older.
Limitations.
But I'm 31. He looks way older than me. So
yeah, right. I'm 33. He looks like he's like 10 years older than me. It's just because he's. I mean, just the emotional. It really tells a story. I saw this really cool thing on online where they were like some things you might have missed about Silent Hill. I didn't watch the whole thing, but one of the things I saw through the thumbnail was James's eyes. Like the man looks like he hasn't slept in like weeks. He's got raccoon eyes going on. Yeah, which I mean, of course, if you know the ending and know everything going on there, it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, it's his character model like really tells a lot of the story too.
Right, but what's also effective in horror games is not just the visuals of like the monsters and stuff. It's like the things you can't see. Like there's a lot of great games like Amnesia or Visage or something like that, where it's like, or like Madison, where like, yeah, you see that like they'll pop up on you like in the dark or something, but like sometimes you're just being chased and you can't see what's chasing you, and really nothing's chasing you, but the game tricks you into thinking you are, and that's really effective. Like that messes like human psychology. The best horror games tap into that stuff where it's not just like a physical enemy actually fighting you, where it's like like the game tricks you into thinking you're getting chased.
It's the I mean, it's the old Rocky Horror Picture Show line where Tim Curry says it's the anticipation. You know, it's the waiting. Like when it finally crescendos and it all builds up, and then there's nothing. Sometimes I think, especially in horror movies, that's even scarier. Because it's like, well, what the fuck's happening? Like, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's a risky move because it can take you out of the media that you're engaging with, whether that's video games or movies. But sometimes, I mean, it can really amp up things because then that brief little lull can bring you into like a false sense of security. And then they do the jump scare, and you're even more scared because you thought everything was fucking safe.
It's true. Now we hit on all that. We already hit on psychological versus jump scares, but I think jump scares can be effective. Now I think they're overused in movies and
Alan
games,
Wake,
especially in Alan Wake too. Like I thought there was way too many jump scares, especially in the retirement home. Like I just thought there was excessive amount. Like almost every freaking door, every freaking door.
It was way too many old people looking at me.
And that was like, I think that was like the best part of the game in terms of like scariness. Like that was awesome. But they just took
the
out
basement was so good.
Yeah.
Like with the short film and all that stuff. Like that was so creepy. The atmosphere was really good. I remember just definitely like checking every corner and like checking my six and all that, as they say.
But jump scares can be really effective too. I mean, like Friday Nights at Freddy's does that a great job. I mean, it keeps you on edge because you never know when you're getting attacked. But I think of like Resident Evil, like when I was a little kid watching my dad play when the dogs jumped through the window, or like Resident Evil 2 when the zombie arms reach through the pieces of wood and try to grab you.
I think some of my first major jump scares was like Resident Evil 3 like, just Nemesis was true to his name because he just would scare the shit out of me, and I'd always be so pissed off at him. I'm like, dude, leave me alone.
Yeah, especially when he jumps through the window.
Yes.
That part was insane.
Yeah.
Like, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say I don't remember the game very well because it was so long ago now. But there was just so many times I remember, kind of as a kid, just being like, I would try to fight him or I try to run away because they had that really cool choice based system that like really amped up the tension too. I think it was in real time too, so you had to make the choice while he was coming at you, which was also like crazy for a game back then. Nobody was really doing that.
Yeah,
so that was really cool. But yeah,
and it's the only Resident Evil game that had that choice system too, so it makes it unique.
It was interesting,
especially for like a really short game. But that was one of the biggest disappointments of the remake, is that I wish they took out the entire police station segment for Jill, and like that's where a lot of the best parts of the game were at, especially when Nemesis jumps to the window with the rocket launcher.
And they took out the clock tower too, of course.
They took out the clock tower section, which is awesome as well. But the police station was the biggest letdown. But yeah, but the jump scares can be really effective for a game, and there's a lot of great ones, of course. But I think they are overused a bit. If a game relies on it way too much, there's games that just like every 5 minutes, like I think Callisto Protocol is a good example of that, where like every 5 minutes is a stupid jump scare. But now jump scares are not always going to be like predetermined. They can be like Dead Space, for example, where the enemies randomly spawn back or spawn different hallways, and you're like, oh shit, and they just come out of nowhere.
Yeah, Dead Space is a great example because it's a game where you feel really powerful, and then all of a sudden the monsters just remind you that you're not shit. It's a really great moment from a game dev perspective, not so much from a player perspective. But I remember playing the remake, obviously, because it wasn't that long ago, last year. And I mean, I played the original twice, 3 times, so I know the Ishimura decently. I'm not going to say I'm some kind of master, but I knew it all right. Plus YouTube videos and walkthroughs and everything else.
Yeah.
Popular media, but like, I mean, the game constantly finds ways to surprise you, to take risks, and it almost always pays off in that game. That's an incredible game. And yeah, jump scares is one of the big ones where you just have enemies just thinking that, or you're going down as Isaac down a hallway thinking you're safe, and then enemies are like, gotcha.
Right.
And that's really effective.
Right. And then we also hit on psychological scare, like horror in comparison to jump scares. Psychological is like, as we said, like they'll make a sound, they'll throw a sound at you. You don't know where it's coming from, and there's nothing really there. But it tricks your brain into thinking. It taps into like that, the fight or flight instinct that everybody has.
Absolutely,
and that's where
Silent Hill very common.
Amnesia.
It was very common in Silent Hill 2 remake, which I liked because there was often times where I'd hear noises and I'd be like, "The fuck is that?" And I never played Silent Hill 2, so for me it was like, it wasn't like Dead Space where I was like, "Oh, okay, that's just clearly this or that," or like, "I remember this, they're trying to get me." I couldn't do that. So I was always like on, pins and needles in terms of tenseness. I always thought, something would be right around the corner. Obviously, you've got the radio thing that makes sounds when you're near some of the enemies, which to me just sounds like a clicker. And obviously, if you go to The Last of Us, right, a lot of that in terms of like hearing the clickers or hearing certain enemies in the environment was a big part of it. Obviously, you had the the superhero vision or whatever it was called. I can't remember what it's called in the game, but basically superhero vision, so you can see through walls and see the enemies and stuff.
Yeah.
And that was a really important part too. So yeah, being able to hear the enemies is almost as important, really, as being able to see them.
Right, and the funny thing is, Silent Hill 3 and 4 are way scarier than Silent Hill 2. So I really hope they do a remake, because if people think Silent Hill 2 remake is scary, wait till Silent Hill 3 and 4. Like 3 full on throws you in crazy demonic red, the other world stuff. Like really a lot more.
I think the worst thing about playing Silent Hill 2 is that Kim and I have been dealing with like rats for like a month. Also while I'm sick, and so like while I'm playing Silent Hill 2, trying to like make sure that I'm staying away from my surroundings and noises and anything else. Sometimes I'll just like hear noises behind me, and I'll be like, oh. And I'll get like startled, or like I think Kim came out of the room once and she opened the door, and it scared our door is really loud because it's an old house. It scared the shit out of me. But yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
the atmosphere of the game itself is really good, but
that's true.
also sometimes the atmosphere of what you're in. I mean, I always turn off the lights and
That's true.
try to make sure I don't have lights going on.
Yeah, New England is very scary. I mean, every time I go up there, like the houses are really old and they creak and they're all made out of wood and stuff. Like it's not like that as much in Florida because everything in Florida is like pretty much new. Most houses in
Yeah,
Florida were built in the 80s or 90s, and like New
right.
England, the houses were built like
So long
1920s,
ago. Yeah.
1920s, 1800s. Some of them. Yeah, creepy. All right. And then I think another category to talk about what makes games scary is like the storytelling and the characterization of our characters. Like because horror games always tend to tackle like dark narratives, disturbing narratives, and there's a lot of games tackle like they attack like the reality, like or is it what we're seeing real or not? Like there's a lot of
Right.
many of them have that mechanic where it's like is what we're fighting really there or is the character imagining it? And especially like a first example I think of is Amnesia with the insanity meter. Like
Mm.
you go in the wrong direction, it gets worse and worse and worse, and the sounds get worse and worse. But and then like we keep talking about Silent Hill 2, but like the storytelling in the game is really dark. Like it tackles
Yes.
very serious themes.
Yeah.
You're not talking about sexual abuse in like Spyro the Dragon, right? It's a horror game.
I
Horror games.
now that is a horror game to me. The voice of Spyro the Dragon doing a PSA about sexual abuse.
The Elijah
Jesus
Wood
Christ.
Spyro.
Elijah Wood. Oh God.
Yeah, but like only horror games only like really. There's not many games that tackle like those kind of serious themes.
Yes.
It's usually horror games.
I think the closest we ever get is RPGs, just
Yeah,
because they're really long games.
yeah,
I know that some of the Persona games, for example, tackle some of those topics. Obviously, not necessarily in the same way as Silent Hill,
yeah,
but yeah, it's a very rare thing. I mean, even in movies, it's a tough topic, you know.
yep,
But I think it's great that oh God, I'm gonna praise Konami. Excuse me. I'm gonna. I mean, I think it's great that they did this. I mean, I know I said this last podcast, so excuse me for repeating myself, but it's just completely uncommon and even unheard of for video games to address these kinds of issues. And I think they did a really great job, especially for a game that came out 20 plus years ago. Again, I don't know if Bloober was the right team for that, given what they did with the medium, but they ended up pulling it off. So whatever. I feel like they kind of redeemed themselves
yeah,
for what they did with the medium. So
yeah. But also we talked about like insanity and all that and like supernatural stuff, but horror games can tackle on like real issues as we talked about with sexual abuse, but like not just that, but like murder and like someone's family getting killed or like
mental illness,
mental illness. Yeah,
yeah, the stuff with Hereditary or Haunting of Hill House. Those are obviously movies and not video games, but there's plenty of stuff about mental illness and Dead Space 2 and Dead Space 2 with the PTSD stuff that Isaac goes through. That relates back also to the insanity and hallucinations.
yep,
And then of course Silent Hill 2 was originally what I was going to say, but I said Dead Space. But I mean, they're both correct. Silent Hill 2 also had a lot of that stuff about mental illness with Eddie and being bullied and stuff like that. I mean, bullying is obviously a serious issue.
yeah,
I work with kids. I mean, bullying still, of course, happens.
yeah,
So yeah, it's another serious topic that I think horror games are very, and horror in general, are very well predisposed to take care of very well
yeah.
if they do it right.
Yeah, and another unique thing to horror games generally is storytelling through like files and like build up through like documents and stuff like that, letters. Like Resident Evil, obviously, that comes to mind. Like a lot of storytelling in like Resident Evil 1 in the mansion is done through diaries that you find or security logs or something like that. And like everybody knows For Itchy Tasty, like that's very classic.
Yep.
The Keeper's Diary, that's probably the most famous Resident Evil file. And there's a really awesome fan movie you should watch on YouTube. I totally recommend it, by Resident Evil. It's one of the best. It's probably the best Resident Evil movie ever made. And it was done. It was only like a 10-minute, 15-minute video by fans. That was incredible. But anyway, that the only like there's not a lot of genres that really do that. Like it's really just survival horror that does that. Like Last of Us does that too. Like in the game, Frank Frank's story is only told through like I think he wrote a diary or something, right? And then we
Oh,
had a
who
piece.
did?
Remember in Last of Us, like
Oh,
what was his name? Frank, the guy that hung himself in the
yeah,
house.
yeah, yeah. He had a whole bunch of notes about that gave you really important context
Yes, yeah,
about why he hung himself and his
yeah,
issues with his partner. I believe if it was Frank's partner who hung himself in that game, but I don't remember.
yeah. What was the guy's name? It was that helps you with the car. Is that what was his name?
That was Frank.
That
Frank
was
was the
Frank.
guy who
Okay,
helps you with the car,
his
but his
boyfriend.
partner is the one who hung
Yeah,
himself. Yeah,
yeah,
his
yeah.
boyfriend. Yeah,
Okay, okay. But yeah,
yeah,
that's what I meant. That's a good example of like storytelling done through files, and like it's totally optional. You don't even have to find most of those. Usually, like files are meant for like locker combinations and stuff like that. But I think it's very effective storytelling when you allows the player to like build up the story through discovering new rooms and exploration and things like that. I think, like I said, there's not many genres that really do that. Like it's like only survival horror that really does that. Now that I think about it.
yeah.
All right. So another way that makes a video game scary is feeling vulnerable. Now, Resident Evil, of course, you get like rocket launchers, grenade launchers, shotguns, rifles, and like Alan
Right.
Wake, same thing. You fight back a lot, and Silent Hill, you do get several weapons, but you're still kind of vulnerable because it's not
Yeah.
like you're not
Even
getting
late
grenade launcher.
game, I was still struggling for some ammo. And there were still definitely moments where I felt like I could definitely die pretty easily. But yeah, so I feel like it had a really nice balance. Resident Evil, I mean, maybe early game feels a little survival-ish, but towards the late game for sure, but even towards the middle, you
Yeah,
really start feeling like, especially if you're playing the remakes, and if you're playing RE4, obviously.
yeah,
I think RE3 and RE2 I think they held out for a little longer than RE4, but still, I mean, you could definitely feel that more actiony side come in, especially when you're playing as Carlos in RE3.
for sure. I mean, the thing with Resident Evil is that all the characters are like trained cops and SWAT members and
Right.
special forces and secret agents. So Resident Evil is not the best example of vulnerability, but the best example I think of is like Outlast or Alien Isolation because
Mhm.
you can't fight back. You have to hide,
Right.
and
I
that
I usually can't stand those kind of games because I like being able to fight back, and I just feel like it'd be
see
even at
Resident.
the beginning of Resident Evil 7, right?
I was right about to say Resident Evil 7. Like that was
Yeah,
because I just said Resident
that
Evil doesn't
was
have that, but Resident Evil 7 has that.
Resident Evil 7 does, and Resident Evil 8 briefly has it too in the dollhouse with the baby and stuff. You can't fight back there either.
Yeah, and
With the
You can't fight Lady D either. You have to run away from her.
right, right. So there are some moments um,
Yeah.
where I definitely felt really tense. Um, I remember the first time Ethan's hand got cut off, and I was like, "What the fuck?" I was like, "What the hell is going on?" But he just brushed it off. It's just some chemicals. That'll.
Yeah.
But yeah, Resident Evil 7. I mean, I remember streaming that back in I want to say 2018, 2019, quite a while ago, and the stuff with Jack at the beginning of the game scared the shit out of me. I remember going up to that door. I think we've talked about this before, but I love telling this story, so I'll tell it again. But I remember going to the door that you're supposed to lift up the little hatch that goes into the cellar to get away from Jack. And I made a break for it when I saw Jack was going away. And I didn't realize that the door was locked. So in my highest pitched, whiniest voice, I was like, "Oh, I can't believe it's locked." I was scared out of my mind. So yeah, I don't mind it in moderation, and I think at some point I will play Alien Isolation. But that was not an intentional rhyme. But
Bars.
but for right now, I'm not usually a big fan of those kind of games, just because I like to be able to fight back. And a whole game of me being tense and nervous and stuff. I mean, put aside the fact that I just played Silent Hill 2, but again, you can fight back in that game, so I don't know. But yeah, Alien Isolation I do want to play, but Amnesia, oh my god, I'll never touch those games. That is not for me.
Yeah. Those are really scary. Especially
Yeah.
the bunker one that just came out not too long
Yeah,
ago.
I heard that was good. I heard that got solid reviews.
Yeah, it's very good. And it's on Game Pass, but I have it on Steam too. Now, but that genre tends to be first person, where you're limited. But there are examples of third person, like Evil Within. Like Evil Within, you get chased and you in scripted moments, and if you get caught, you die in one hit, which can be frustrating, but it makes you feel very vulnerable. But yeah, it typically tends to be the first person games like Resident Evil 7 and 8 and Amnesia and Alien Isolation, Outlast,
Right.
which is very effective. Personally, not my kind of horror. I prefer third person shooting, where like
Right.
Resident Evil 2 remake kind of thing. I'm not a big fan of the first person horror, but yeah. All right. Another thing that makes games scary would be the AI and like unpredictability of like the monsters.
Right.
Like, cause first of all, like Resident Evil 2 remake and Dead Space do the cool thing where they respawn enemies in different locations, or like the AI adjusts to how well you're doing. If you're doing really really well, the game thinks like, okay, let's make this harder. Or if they feel like you're struggling, they help you out a little bit. But it always keeps you. You're always unsure of where an enemy's gonna pop up. I think Silent Hill 2. I want to say Silent Hill 2 did that, but I feel like every time I killed them in the hallway, they never showed up again. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure too.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure too.
but so, for the good and the bad, the AI can be good. It can be a really cool feature of the game, or it could be really bad. Like sometimes, like the AI can be very random and like really stupid, and like you can easily fool it, and it looks goofy. But when it's done right, it can really be cool. Like the xenomorph in Alien Isolation is
Yeah, of course.
very unpredictable. You never know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another example of something that makes a game scary would be isolation, like feeling isolated. Of course, like usually in a horror game, usually by yourself. It's not as scary if you had a whole group with you. I can't think of a game really when you're in a group. You got like the only thing I can think of is like co-op, or like Resident Evil 5 or something. But
Yeah, but that immediately brings down the horror, and that's not. If Resident Evil 4 is barely a horror game, Resident Evil 5 is almost not a horror game.
yeah, for sure. And we talked about sound design, of course, and the ambient noises and screams, and silence and things like
Right.
that. And like the visuals, of course, we talked about that. Like, one of the things I always think of is like Siren or Fatal Frame. Have you ever played Siren or have you ever heard?
I
of it?
remember playing a little bit of Fatal Frame when I was younger. I didn't last very long playing it, if I remember
Yeah.
correctly. But I remember either seeing it on TV or maybe playing it myself on a friend's. I never owned it, but I think I played it on a friend's system or something.
It was on G4. It was on G4 a lot.
Yeah, I remember definitely seeing it on G4. But I didn't last very long. Those games scared the hell out of me. They were dark, creepy. That was back when the whole little girl who's Japanese, who's really fucking scary thing was happening with The Ring and The Grudge and the other movie, and no, there was another movie, but they loved it. They loved that shit back in the mid 2000s. That was so. I mean, there's a reason why Scary Movie parodied it so much, because it was so popular back then.
For sure. I mean,
oh, by the way, I will say The Ring actually does hold up with Naomi Watts. I mean, don't watch any of the sequels, but the first movie is actually solid and like has a really good story of the little girl and like why she's doing this and her backstory and stuff. I don't know. I haven't seen The Ringu, like I haven't seen the original Japanese version. I do want to see that at some point.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my tangent.
I was scared of The Grudge. But although the scarier version was Ju-on, the Japanese version.
Of course.
No one does horror like Japan. Now, and like as you mentioned, like the mid 2000s was all about scary little girls.
Yeah.
Like I
got fucking Uzumaki and all the stuff that Junji Ito did, which is still very popular with manga and anime fans. I mean, I know the animes that cover his works can never catch a fucking break, but I digress. But yeah, I mean, Junji Ito, of course, very legendary. They did they did the color blue, or I forget what it was called. The one that was basically like Black Swan, but for anime. It came out before Black Swan came out, to be clear, but I can't remember what the movie was called.
Yeah,
Perfect Blue, I think it was called. But yeah. Oh, don't say this anime classic. Yeah, it's Perfect Blue, which I haven't seen yet, but very similar. Lots of psychological themes. Yeah, Japan just does horror very, very well. There's not as much horror anime as we really used to get. I mean, horror anime is always tricky because you've got to draw the horror, and I think on a certain level that's always going to be less scary than the real thing. But I mean, I when it's done right and introduced in a certain anime, I think that's great. But yeah, I mean, horror anime is not as big as it used to be. There used to be, like Vampire D and like obviously Junji Ito and Perfect Blue and stuff.
There's a lot of zombies are really popular in Asia.
Right, zombies work, but they often these days especially become more comedic.
Like Korea,
but yeah,
does a fantastic job with zombie stuff.
Which one is that?
Like Korea, there's a lot of
Korea.
There's a lot of awesome jobs.
Yes.
Like Korean movies and shows. Like Train to Busan is like one of the greatest zombie movies ever.
It's so good. Yeah, I recommend the YouTube channel Mother's Basement, which came out a couple weeks ago with a video called Horror Anime That Won't Waste Your Time, and it's about like pretty like not very lengthy anime that is either horror adjacent or is horror. Because like I said, horror anime isn't as popular or as consistent as it used to be.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of old school 80s and 90s AMVs. Yeah. But yeah.
But anyway, there's a lot of horror games that have creepy children. Like some of for the 2000s, there was a lot of creepy little girls.
They love
BioShock,
especially
and Fear,
especially like little girls doing jump rope. Sorry, Seb, I don't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. Have you ever played Fear before?
No, I haven't. I did see that it was on. I feel like I saw it on either Steam or Game Pass or something. Or
I haven't.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
Yes, that's where I saw it. It was from your collection, and I was very tempted. I have it in my backlog, so maybe at some point I'll get around to it. But yeah, creepy girls and creepy kids in general. It's just something that really taps into. People had that stuff with the devil is controlling my child kind of trope too. The character of Damien from a lot of those movies. I haven't seen really any of those movies, but obviously it's a popular trope that still continues. But yeah, not so much about video games though.
Mainly the first one. If you're talking about the Omen.
Yeah, The Omen. I couldn't think about what the hell it was called.
Yeah,
The Grudge, The Omen, The Ring. They love They love the word the.
Yeah.
The.
And then Resident Evil 7 has the creepy girl as well.
Of course, yes, that's a great example. Yep, Fear, Resident Evil 7, of course, and the reveal with who the little girl is in Resident Evil 7, I thought was Chef's Kiss.
Fatal Frame, where you take those ghosts, those gross girls.
Right.
Yeah, you take pictures.
Yes,
they get right. They get right in your face.
Yes, they do, and I was like, no, thank you to this game.
Yeah. All right, and then the last category that makes the game scary is like real world parallels and existential themes as like apocalyptic themes, things that could happen, I suppose. Yeah, The
Last of Us kind of. I mean, I know it's a little bit of a stretch, but I do think they're trying to hit on post-apocalyptic themes and sort of make it scientific through the fungi, which is real in Scotland. So good luck, James. So
that's his dream, though. That's his dream.
I know. I mean, he's living his dream. So I think he called Naughty Dog up personally. But I think that's what they're trying to do. I know, obviously, it and the TV show too. Of course, I know that it is a little hit or miss for some people. But yeah, I enjoy when video games try to, get kind of either politics or real world issues or parallels involved too. Obviously, with this isn't so much horror, although I think Godzilla could be played as horror, and maybe in some parts kind of is, especially when he's the villain.
It's a monster thing, so
it's a monster movie. It's broadly horrific, right? But I mean, like the devastation that Godzilla creates is literally like fucking parallels with the nuclear bomb that was dropped in Hiroshima, and Nagasaki. You got stuff like that.
Yeah, Godzilla is literally a metaphor for nukes. So, all right, came out in the 50s, so it's not too far away from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So, a lot of parallels there, of course. Not
sure.
Yeah, so like Last of Us is a good example. It's like it's not just like the horror of like zombies or whatever, but like what people would do in a situation like that, where people kill each other, would still become bandits. Last of Us is a good example. Where like when you're driving in Pittsburgh and Ellie and Joel get jumped by bandits, right?
Right. It's not always the zombies, right? Sometimes it's just
Yeah.
sometimes human beings were the monsters the whole time, which we'll talk about during metaphor.
Yeah, like Resident Evil 3, for example. Like, you got Nemesis and all the monsters and everything, but like Nikolai is a
Right.
huge bad guy.
Total asshole. I think I hated that guy in the remake more than I hated Nemesis.
Yeah.
At least Nemesis was just charmingly saying stars the whole time.
He-
Nikolai was doing a whole fucking speech.
Yeah, he was even worse in the original and in the Outbreak games. He was pulling a bunch of shit with people. Yeah, he was killing people left and right. All right, that's everything. I think we hit on pretty much everything that makes horror games scary. So let's talk about what we've been playing. Now, I have really nothing to say because I've not been playing much this week. I've been very busy. Next week, I plan on playing a lot of games and really get into far into games. So I'll leave this to Dory. And Dory, you've been playing Metaphor, which I also put like 30 hours in too. So you probably put more into
Seb
that.
and I are like literally at the same spot in Metaphor, so this will be great. I had some time to play today, like a couple hours, but I was like, I felt good that you and I were pretty much at the same spot, so I was like, I'm just gonna leave it parked there. So I've talked about Metaphor through my 6 hours. I would say the biggest change I've made right off the top of the bat is I have stopped being rigid about the archetypes because I've realized, because at the start of the game, I'm like, well, I just see Stroll as a swordsman. I see Hulkenberg as a knight. My lead guy should be a seeker. That makes sense. It's a unique archetype. But I've given that up because I've realized that that's a really dumb way to play. It's just, you just get your ass kicked. And as soon as I embraced like letting other characters play other archetypes, all sorts of new gameplay strategies became open to me, new synergy attacks, new ways of playing different characters that I couldn't play before.
It's the whole point of the game, really.
It's the whole point of the game. But for me, it was like, I don't know. I think it's my autism, honestly. Like when I start the game, I'm just like, okay, well, these guys are this, so I don't want to change them. That feels wrong, but it doesn't matter. But I think it's just my brain being weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's the biggest change I've made. It's had a pretty positive impact. I die every now and then. Fantasy is dead, etc., etc. But like generally speaking, I'm doing pretty well. I don't lose too often, and when I do, I eventually consult a guide. I have a lot of positives, and I have the smallest nitpicks of this game that you could have. You need a fucking magnifying glass to see these nitpicks.
Well, start with the nitpicks because the positive side is going to be longer. So
yeah. All right. And again, sorry about my voice. By next week, it'll be back to normal. I'm already much better than I was last week. I will say one of my biggest problems, I say biggest in big quotation marks. I know this is the Persona thing, or maybe it's an Atlas thing. I don't know. It's kind of awkward when some of the characters are like, however, or like they'll say a line and then they won't say anything else. Yeah. And it's just kind of like a vibe line read where it's like, this is supposed to cover everything that they say, but sometimes it's kind of awkward. Yeah. Like Gallica will be like, whoa. And I'll be like, that's the same door that we just opened like 5 minutes ago, Gallica. It's not that impressive. Again, these are everything I'm going to say, incredibly minor nitpicks.
Yeah.
But when you get to the, to be clear, this is like either number 3 or number 2 on my list. So I have to pick at something about why it's not number 1. It could still be number 1, but I'm about halfway through.
How are you finding the pacing?
I like the pacing. I think I was a little intimidated about 70 hours or so. How Long to Beat says 65 or 63, but that plus side stuff says 72. So I'll probably split the difference. It'll probably be upper 60s. But I love the pacing. I really do feel like after the infiltration mission that I just did, I won't say anything too specific for story spoilers, but I do feel like I'm about halfway through the game, or maybe a little bit more. I don't feel like in terms of the story that like, oh, I'm right there, I should be done with the game. No, I feel like the map is huge. There are lots of characters to talk to. There are lots of side quests to go on. Like, I don't feel like oh, this game should be done by now, right? I think I had that with Final Fantasy a little bit. If I remember, Rebirth is what I mean, not 16.
Rebirth was too long.
Yeah, Rebirth was too long, and I didn't like the open world as much. So I think that's why this is going to be higher on my list than that, because there's no real open world to speak of anyway, and all the areas feel open enough without feeling too broad. And then also like no pacing issues I've seen. I'll talk about my other nitpicks. Got my notes right here. I will say, if you're not going to use the informants or a guide, prepare to like really get like beat up in these dungeons. Now I use the informants and I even use guides if I have to, but there are definitely times where the enemy just has your number in terms of weaknesses or in terms of like levels or whatever. So definitely be using those informants as much as you can. That's not really a criticism, but it's just like more of a tip. Yeah. Otherwise, this game is going to be really hard. You can always change the difficulty from the the menu. My voice is leaving me. From the menu. And you can always look at the guide and the informant. That you kind of like write down whatever the informant gives you and then put it for later. One of my bigger criticisms of the game is also, and again, I think this is an Atlas thing, and I just don't like it. So I get that it's a thing that they just do. I don't like that MP is such a scarce resource. I'll go through a checklist of all the things that you would think get you MP back, but they don't. You go to a save room, no MP back. You beat enemies, generally speaking, no MP back. Sometimes if you have a certain archetype or, if you're the mage archetype and you're defeating enemies in the overworld, you get small amounts of MP back. Now, I do understand why this is. MP is one of the most powerful resources in the game. It's an incredible part of what makes the game like so good. And I think in general, from what I'm seeing online, this is just how Atlas games work. It's supposed to be kind of like a natural stopgap, so that you're not just racing through the game, beating every dungeon in one day. I respect that. I do think it's a little annoying. Sometimes I do just want to beat a dungeon in one day, and sometimes I have because I use my items, or I'm doing all the side quests. I mean, I do just about everything. I do all the support stuff. I'll talk about that later, but I pretty much do everything. There's some food and there's some items and there's some archetypes that minorly help, but it still does get kind of like, I'm not going to say frustrating, but it's notable, maybe irritating even at times for me when I'm like near the end of a dungeon and my character's got nothing left and I've got nothing left, maybe on a personal level, maybe I'm tired or whatever. It can be a little annoying, I guess I would say. But I mean, you can always leave, come back the next day, teleport to a Magla Hollow, and then you're fine. But it does get annoying. And I wish there are more items that could help you. There are some items that could do it, but most of it, which are sold by merchants, are limited time, or not limited time, but like limited quantity. So even if you come back like a week later, they're still gone. So that's a little frustrating. I will always call this out. I'll never support it, and Seb knows about this. I hate when bosses can heal themselves. Now it's not that rampant. It's not like, and even when they can, most of the time it's a one-off gimmick and they can't do it again. Like there's a fight with can't really say it. There's a fight with a boss where his ally heals him once and then that's it. It's a little tedious, but it's not a big deal. Generally, I don't have a huge problem with this just because it doesn't happen that often. I've played for about 35 hours, maybe a little less, and I could count probably on one or two hands how many enemies can heal themselves. And almost all of them are bosses, and almost all of them have ways around that. Generally, there's one or two examples where I couldn't get around it, and you just kind of had to go with the flow. But I think that's it. That's really it. That's all my criticisms. And like I said, you would need a magnifying glass to really see those criticisms because they're nitpicks at best. I think they're real criticisms and they're stuff I wish wasn't in the game. I wish they just. I know it's an RPG. I know a lot of characters say lines. I would still really, really rather us either not say a word or just say the whole line, not this weird, awkward middle ground where Gallic is like, "Whoa," and then like doesn't say anything after. I don't really. It's not a big deal, but it does. It's just a little funny, especially when it doesn't really match what they're saying in the text box.
Yeah.
Like somebody's saying, however, but it's just like a general like catch-all, and it doesn't really specifically match what's going on. So that's all my nitpicks. I don't know if you share any of that or don't or.
Well, like last week I said, my issue with the game was like I do have some pacing issues with the game. Like there's parts where they could have cut out, where it's like just a little too much dialogue and like side missions, like not like the best side missions ever. Like some of them are good, but like so like it doesn't need to be like an 80-hour game. It could be like a 60-hour game. Or, you know what I mean? Just cut like some meat off like here and there. Yeah. I have the same problem with every Persona game as well. Well, like, they start wearing on me. Where I don't feel like playing it that day. I want to play something a little more action packed. Sure. Go back to it later. But that's just more of a me thing. But but that's really my only issue. It's my game of the year. But that's my big. That was like my big thing.
I haven't had any major pacing issues, and I'll talk about the side quests too. I generally like them a lot.
Yeah, I mean, them.
I'm not saying that they're revolutionary or going to change the face of RPGs, but I mean they're side quests.
Yeah, they're fun.
That's fine. But I feel like where the side quests get really good is obviously the Persona stuff, right? The social mechanics.
Yeah,
I love. There's this little girl in the game named Maria. I don't think this is any kind of major spoiler, but like I work with kids, so obviously I have a soft spot for kids. Whenever like she wants to hang out and talk, and like she wants to talk to me about, her personal. I want to get specific, but I don't want to spoil. So her specific issues that she's got going on, which are pretty major. I'm like, Maria, I'm right there. Coming right to you. And I love her character so much. Like. Compared to all the other characters who, of course, are all adults, or at least like older teenagers or young adults, at least, she's such a breath of fresh air because she's so cheerful and naive, and she's got all these questions, and she's not really afraid to show her emotions. I just love her as a character. She's probably one of my favorites. I will like right now. I have to raise my tolerance so I can interact with her again, which I think is so funny. But so that's become like my number one priority now that I'm done with the mission I just did. I love the support stuff. I think it's great. I love all the characters. Heisme is incredible. I love Hulkenberg. I like Stroll. He's great. And the runner of the gunner, I can't remember his name, but the guy who really talks British. I mean, he really, you know what I mean? He just really talks like he's from the deep inner towns of London. Yeah. But he's cool. I like him. Very passionate about what he does, so that's great. Yeah, I think the antagonist is written well. I don't know. I don't think saying his name is a spoiler, but but the main antagonist is, I mean, they show him in the first 5 minutes killing the king, but
Louis.
Yeah, Lord Luis. Lord Luis.
Yeah.
Sorry, 1 second.
Okay. It's not a spoiler. It's like the first 5 minutes. Like.
Yeah, I was about to say. He is. He's great. He's not great, but he's written well. Is what I'm trying to say.
Great character.
I feel like yes, he's a great character. His motives make sense. I'm not saying I agree with them, but they are logical. They are understandable. He gets time to actually explicate like why the fuck he's done these horrible things. Literally. He's basically got like when he's explaining his stuff to Stroll, I'm like, okay. I mean, it's like basically in leftist speak, that's like accelerationism. It's like you're not paying attention to this huge issue. Okay, here's this town that you can see from your fucking watchtower, and it's on fire. So I mean, I don't approve, but I get it. I understand what he's doing. Obviously, deep down, he's just in it for himself. he's selfish. He just wants power. But there's at least a veneer of like, oh, I'm doing it for the people's good, and sometimes you just have to do really terrible shit for the sake of the people, for the greater good, right? For the greater good.
The greater
Q,
good.
yes, for the greater good. Q Hot Fuzz.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think he's written really well. I think there's another minor antagonist, throughout one of the towns, Martia. That's written exceptionally well. Deals with really serious issues. I thought that it handled that topic very well. I felt for the character involved. Obviously, I didn't condone their actions, but I understood where they were coming from and thought that the game handled a very serious topic very well. I'll talk about the combat because I haven't mentioned the combat. Turn-based gameplay, I've already talked about how I'm sold on it. I think what's really funny is that I think a couple of years ago, maybe, I was like, I'm not into turn-based. I like action-based more. And that's still true, by the way. I still do prefer action-based, but I love turn-based now as well. And I think what's really funny is it's just a genre race. Like, even if like this switched off with my number one, which is Infinite Wealth, it would just be another turn-based JRPG. So very true to form. But yeah, the turn-based combat's excellent. There's weaknesses, there's resistances, there's different types of attacks, there's synergy attacks, there's items, there's guarding, there's frontline and backline, there's escaping. I mean, there's so much. It's really done really, really well. I never feel like, oh, I don't want to fight unless I like do the scan from Gallica and I'm like, oh shit, I'm like 10 levels under leveled or something. But otherwise, I'm always up for a fight. I love fighting. They make it's the little things too, because it's like they give you the ability to fight certain enemies from the overworld and just one-shot them if they're too weak. That way you're not wasting your time. And I love stuff like that. That really shows that Atlas appreciates the time that you're putting into their game, and I love stuff like that. That's just great. Characters are wonderful. I've already talked about this. They're all fun to be around. I love talking to them. I have bad news for people who don't want politics in their game. This is literally politics, the game. Like, the whole point of it is that you're trying to be king and you're trying to put in power someone who can actually do the job. And I mean, this game, I'm kind of paraphrasing the IGN review, which gave it a 9 out of 10, which I'd roughly agree with. Maybe I'd go a little higher. But they don't do decimals anymore. So, this is very political. I mean, they're very upfront. I've taken some screenshots of Brigitte, the Igniter mage, the way she talks about the world. I've talked, the way that Heismay talks about the world, the way that Eldas are treated, minorities are treated in this game, the way that poor people are treated. I mean, you're literally like, I don't know, you're kind of like a socialist, kind of, almost, in a certain way, just the way that you're talking, at least like relative to the environment and political climate. What you're saying is like really radical, that all tribes should be treated equally, and I'm pretty sure somebody said that once in the 60s. And then it's very blatant. The game is very on the nose about its message about egalitarianism and, whether that's racially or gender or economic, it's not shy about saying what the fuck it's about. And I think that's great. It might strike some people as too preachy, but I mean, it's literally all about becoming a political candidate and getting your message out there.
Yeah.
So I feel like if any game is allowed to be a little preachy, it's a game where you're trying to become king.
Yeah, every Atlas game is very deep and they tackle serious themes all the time.
Yes.
Not always politics so much, but like Persona, yes. The Persona games have a lot of like sexual allegories and things like that. Like they tackle a lot of serious topics. So metaphor is not.
I'll talk about it. I'll talk about a few more things and then wrap it up.
Okay.
I feel like the music is really great. I start humming the tunes. It's not like, I don't think it's winning soundtrack of the year by any means, but I think everything works really great. Everything sounds like a nice little background tune. I gotta call out the main battle theme though. I don't know what the fuck that dude is saying, but he is spitting. I don't know what the fuck that dude is going on about, but I'm into it. He's like an opera singer, but he's rapping. I don't know what's happening. But it's incredible. It's great that you can change the difficulty whenever, especially because Atlas games can be pretty tough. And boss fights, by the way, feel very tense, but I always feel very rewarded. I always feel like I'm having a good time. I have this really cool moment where I completely fucked everything up. At the last possible turn, the boss had like a sliver of health, and I had one character left, and we were like in an arms race. I kept healing, but he kept bringing me down to near zero. So I was like, I knew his weakness, obviously, by this point. So I was like, what the fuck do I do? Do I have any items? So I was like, well, here's the thing. I either win and I move forward, or I lose and I lose progress. I go back to the beginning, or I press the left analog stick, which brings me back to the beginning. So either way, back to the beginning, right? So I'm like, fuck it. So I use an item that he's weak to, and it kills him. And I was like jumping for fucking joy because I was about to lose like 15 minutes. Most boss fights aren't that long, but I was under leveled, but I knew his weakness, so it kind of leveled out. Pun intended. Last couple things. Treasure hunting, always fun. I always try to go around all the dungeon, and I really enjoy the dungeons. I think that's about it. The visuals are also incredible, if I haven't said. This is just an amazing game. It's my first Atlas game. It's convinced me at some point, not right now, but at some point, to play Persona 5 Royale, or whatever the updated version is. And then maybe go back to P3 Reloaded and P4. I'm not going any lower than that. But yeah, before my voice gives up on me, that's pretty much all I have to say.
You apparently can't play Persona 1 and 2. We don't. Yeah, those are like old hardware. They haven't done anything with those yet. But
but yeah, so that's my plan at some point.
Yeah, you'll definitely love the Persona games and Shin Megami Tensei games. Like, there's so many great Atlas games. Atlas is like one of the best JRPG makers right now, for sure.
Yes.
Metaphor is pretty much a Persona game, just in a fantasy setting with archetype. What makes it stand out is the archetypes, which Persona doesn't have that. Persona, you just play as whatever your character is. And yeah, it's a fantastic game. It's my game of the year. And I agree with everything you've said. The characters are all awesome. The story is great. The music is really good, in my opinion. I would pick it. I would nominate it for soundtrack of the year. I wouldn't say it's the best soundtrack of the year, but I would put it in the top 6 for sure. And the best part of the game is the characters. I think they're all likable. I think the party is awesome. Every Atlas game, I feel like the party is always the shining point of the game. And I think the villain's really good and understandable, and I think it hits on a lot of great themes. I agree with everything you said. Pacing, I have some issues with pacing, but it's not like a serious issue. Sure. It's not like I would dock a lot of points for it. I don't think it's a 10, I don't consider it a 10 out of 10 for me, but it's like a 9. It's like a 9.5. So it's my game of the year.
Yeah.
I'm
just about there with you. I think it's also like a 9 point. Like I said before, I would have given it slightly higher than IGN, but I use decimals. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's like I don't know. It's so close to being a 5. It's ridiculous. I'm trying to
it is a 5.
Pick out the smallest things. I think if I round it up, or if I had to pick a 4 or 5 any day.
Yeah, if you have to nitpick, I think you're 5 because 5 doesn't mean perfect. 5 just means
no, for sure.
The flaws are not major.
I'm trying to see what makes Infinite Wealth better than this. And I mean, my only major criticism of Infinite Wealth was just the ending felt a little flat. But the game had built up so much goodwill up to that point. I didn't really care. It didn't really bother me. I'll never disagree with somebody saying a game could be shorter. We all have busy lives. We all could be playing other games.
Yeah.
But the pacing hasn't really bothered me. I do feel like I'm about halfway through, but yeah.
Yeah, it's not a major thing, but overall, I feel like there's only 2 5 out of 5 games for me. Like if I was using a 5-point scale. And that would be Astrobot and Metaphor. So that's why they're my top 2 games of the year. I think there's a lot of amazing grains this year, but I think there's always something major that docks those games for me. Like Final Fantasy Rebirth has too much. It's just too long. I feel like that has serious that one has serious pacing issues, and and I really love Infinite Wealth too as well. But there's some things in there I don't like as much as like best way I would describe it is I feel like Metaphor and Astrobot are the most memorable games for me overall,
Sure.
like of this year, and I think Rebirth even though it has issues, had a lot of amazing moments too that were memorable, and I think
Yeah,
overall
of course.
that's gonna be my top three. Like
Yeah.
I think it's pretty much locked in unless Dragon Age blows me away or Indiana Jones or something, but I just don't see
Yeah.
it. I don't see Dragon Age being on like a 9.5 level.
Sure.
I think it's gonna be good though. I have a good feeling it's gonna be
Yeah.
good. I don't.
I think it's going to be in either like a 9 or something barely below a 9 for me. But I love the Dragon Age. I mean, I even love Dragon Age 2, even though it's just like a 4 out of 5, but or maybe a little higher. But yeah, I mean, and I love Inquisition. I never got to finish it because October.
Yeah.
But
This is
but yeah, I'm excited.
yeah, not the Dragon's Tail, but this is one of the this is like another one of those years where like like when Elden Ring came out like in March, I think. Like I knew it was my game of the year the entire year. Nothing was going to change that. But like the last 2 years was like I didn't have a game of the year until like September, October. So this game came out pretty late in the year. Of like a game of the year contender, and there's a lot of good steep competition because you and I keep up pretty well, and yeah, I think this deserves to be game of the year. No, will it be nominated for game of the year? It better be. It 100% better be nominated game of the year. I'll be very disappointed. I mean, this got to be a shoo-in to win best RPG of the year. I don't see how you lose to this game, like how you beat this game.
The only thing I can see beating it is, I mean, my own personal goatee, Infinite Wealth. But
Yeah,
I would not be unhappy if Rebirth, Infinite, or Metaphor beat won. You know, I think it's really just like, you know, between all three of those games. I mean, I think there's some serious criticisms you could levy at Rebirth, but between Infinite and Metaphor, at least, I would not be unhappy about either of them.
yeah,
I don't know if Rebirth should win, but it should definitely be in contention, obviously.
yeah. All those games should be nominated for sure. Like, I hope it's not like last year where they completely shunned Octopath Traveler 2 from any nominations. So Metaphor,
Right, I remember that.
they better not do that with Metaphor because it's a JRPG, but it's too big of a seller, and it's very popular. Everybody's talking about it. I just don't see it not being nominated for Game of the Year. But we'll talk about the Game of the Year nominees near December when the Keeleys are right around the corner. So that's our show. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a wonderful Halloween, a spooky,
Yes.
it's a very spooky day. I hate that it's on a Thursday. I hate that I have to work the next day.
Yeah.
That might be a movie day because I don't know if I can have put in the energy to teach the day after Halloween. Now I know the kids are going to be are going to be super hyped on sugar. So yeah, that might just be a put on the Goosebumps episode or something. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. You all have a good night and peace. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Next week, my voice will not be so spooky.